Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Today we are going to explore how to connect your n8n installation with AWS in a secure way. This is super important if you've started making use of AWS within your n8n workflows. You always want to make sure that you have the best security practices in mind when building in the cloud or in anywhere on the web. So this way that we're going to show you is using an IAM user. We're going to set permissions for that IAM user, and then we're going to show you how to connect that IAM user into the n8n console. So let's go over and start off in the AWS console. Here we are in the AWS console. I'm going to assume you've set up an AWS account already. If you haven't, I would go check the docs to do that. We're going to go over to the top left, and we're going to hit the search, and we're going to go and search for IAM. So this is the IAM console. So IAM stands for Identity and Access Management, and it's essentially the hub of all of the policies, permissions, and access that you have within your AWS account. So from here, we can select a lot of different options. There's essentially two ways you can authenticate to AWS. The first is using a user, which is what we're going to use because at the moment, at the time of recording, it's kind of the only way that you can really connect between n8n and AWS. If you have a self-hosted environment, you might be able to use roles too, but we're going to make use of a user. And a user you can kind of roughly link to a physical person or entity. So that might be a person in your development team, it might be your managers, it might be anyone that kind of maps to a physical person. The thing with users is they tend to have longer running credentials, i.e. you might have a user who's got a access key and password, and they might be able to access using that credential set for a longer period of time. The other option of the two is roles. Roles are short-lived. They are more for use cases where you have a machine that's interacting with an application. So a lot of the time when you're using, for instance, EC2, you can set up a role so that you only get temporary access credentials. So that's great because if a credential is leaked for some reason or someone gets access to it, they only have a short period of time in which to use that credential set, and it gets rotated on a regular basis. So it's generally best practice to use roles as much as possible within your AWS environment. But as I mentioned, n8n currently only supports users, especially when you're using the hosted version of n8n. I'm going to show you the most secure way you can do that today. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the left, and we're going to hit this users button. So here we have the users console. You may or may not have users already in this view. So we don't need to worry too much about that, but we're going to go over to create a new user. Here you can provide the name of the user. I would recommend just making it something descriptive so that if you go and review users later down the line, maybe you're doing a security audit, you can just see at a glance kind of which users are being used for what. We don't need to provide AWS managed console access because it's going to be accessed via APIs through n8n. So we could just hit next. The next view is where we set the permissions. So the best practices when using AWS is always to try and scope down the permissions to the least required for that particular task. So if you, for instance, are only accessing S3, you want to make sure that you only give permission to access S3. This is called the principle of least privilege. It's highly recommended that you practice this if you want to maintain security in your environment. And one of the ways that you can try and do this is by using AWS managed policies. So policies are essentially the permissions that you can apply to this user. So this a policy defines like what you can access, what resources, what certain actions you can perform on those resources. You can create your own policies. There's a way to do that. But as far as possible, I recommend you stay with the AWS managed policies until you get comfortable enough to be able to go and actually create those policies yourself. So here you can go to attach policies directly. You can see that there's quite a few AWS managed policies. And usually if you're working with a particular service, say EC2, you can search and you can see there's a whole bunch of policies that are available. The best place to understand these is usually to go and search in the docs. So if you're particularly using a service, it will usually have a section that specifically talks about roles or access control. And that's where it will either recommend certain policies to use or say which policies or which permissions need to be available. So if you are working in a non-production environment, or if you're just iterating fast, you're going to be using a lot of different services. You can also use this administrator access policy. This is what I tend to use because I'm quite familiar with AWS, so I know not to leak credentials and those kind of things. But this is going to give you basically access to everything. And you can do that. It's definitely allowed. And what a good practice is to do is to use administrator access, play around with the stuff, figure out which which policies you need to use. And then from there, you can go and scope down to just use what your actual application is using. That is a way of doing it. Obviously, it's not the sort of best way because you might accidentally leave permissions that you don't necessarily want. But for fast iteration, I can recommend using the administrator access policy. You can see at the top here, you can create your own policy. We won't necessarily do that. Then we can hit next. So this next view, you can just review. You can create tags if you want to be able to sort of allocate costs, or if you want to have some way of grouping different users. I won't necessarily do that, but have a look at tagging in the IAM console docs. So next we can hit create user. So now that our user is created, the next thing we want to do is create a set of credentials that we can then load into n8n. And that's going to allow n8n to make use of this user inside of AWS. So I'm going to click the user to open it up. So here we see the details of the n8n user. We can see the policy that we've provided there is administrator access. If we go to security credentials, we can see that there's a bunch of different options here. The one that we're interested in is this access keys. This is essentially going to give us an AWS access key ID and an AWS access key secret. And these two pieces of information together form the credentials that allow you to authenticate into AWS. So to use that, we're going to just create an access key at the top right. This is kind of just a view to kind of push you to make use of roles or to use better practices. You kind of can ignore it and just go for other. But essentially, the main thing to worry about here is that if you are going to make use of access keys like this, bear in mind that they are long-running keys, so that if you ever leak these keys and you've given access, administrator access, it's going to potentially lead to either data loss, it's going to lead to people deleting your databases, they can spin up crypto miners. There's a lot of nefarious things that can happen if you accidentally lose these keys. And so that's just what this viewpoint is here. It's just trying to get you to use a best practice approach. Because we're going to just use this for our n8n installation, it tends to be safe. If you're using least privilege, it's also a little bit better. You can scope down to not allow things like deleting databases, but just very much bear that in mind as you're about to go through this panel. So if we hit next, you can give a description of the actual access key. This could be things like the date that it was done, or maybe there's a specific reason you want to rotate a key. You can put that in here. We don't need it for now. We just leave that as blank, and we're going to hit create access key. So once we do that, we get the access key ID on the left, and we get the secret access key, which is hidden on the right. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to just leave this open. We'll go over to our n8n application. So here from our n8n dashboard, we're going to create a credential set. So we're going to do that by going to the top right here, and we're going to click down and go to create credential. And from this drop-down list, there is a AWS credential option. So we're going to hit AWS like that and click continue. And from here, we get a couple of options. So first of all is our access key ID and our secret access key. So what we can do is we can go back to our IAM console. We'll just copy this here. I will put it into this access key ID, and we're going to copy here, and I'll copy the secret, and I will pop it into here like so. So the next thing to draw your attention to is the region. Here it's by default set to US East 1. I'd recommend selecting the region that you are working in, because what's going to happen is when you authenticate using these credentials, it's going to by default be in that region. So unless you have a way to modify the region either in your code or whatever block is using this credential, which a lot of them I don't think necessarily have, you need to set the default region in this dialog here. So I work a lot in Europe, so I usually use the Ireland region because it tends to have a lot more of the services available, and it just is a lot quicker for me than the US regions. You can set some of these other options, but I'd recommend keeping the rest as defaults because you can give yourself problems later down the line. I'll set the name to AWS Administrator, and you can do other options like sharing and details, but that's not necessarily AWS specific, so I'll leave that up to you to have a research. So with our credentials set here, you can hit save, and you can see the connection test success dialog. So that kind of gives you a good indication that this is working. So that's a credential set created. What we can do is we can just go to our workflow. We'll create a simple workflow just to test this out. We'll create a trigger manually. So that's the click event. Let's add a node. Let's just do an AWS S3 like this. And let's just do a download a file. So we'll just do a basic download file. What we can do is let's just go over to S3. So, I mean, the credentials are set up. Now I'm just showing you how to test it to make sure that it works. So I've got this bucket here from another demo I did earlier. And in here we have a file. So let me just select that file. And so to test it, I just need the bucket name, which is here. So this n8n sample bucket. So let's just copy that. And then I will put this in the bucket name, and then the key will be over here. Over here. So that's just hard coding the bucket name and the key. And if we choose our credentials, make sure it's set to AWS Administrator. And if we execute step, we should see that it downloads that file. And if you look, you can see it's just the image. So that's just testing it to make sure that it works. In fact, we didn't even need the click trigger, to be honest, but it's kind of working. The next thing I want to show you is just a little bit of sort of admin around the IAM user itself. So if we go back here, so back in the IAM console, we can go to our user and we can open up the n8n user. And now that we've actually tested it, we can go to our security credentials and we can see, we can see it's created, and we can see the last used service and when it was last used. So one thing you might want to do with an access key is you might potentially lose the key, or you've stopped using it, or you may have it already used, but you're not quite sure where it's being used. So one action you can do is to deactivate the key. So deactivate is a two-way door kind of decision. So you can deactivate it if you hit accept. So that will deactivate the keys. So now if we go back to our n8n workflow, we hit here, we execute the step. You can see we get invalid access key ID. That's a good practice if you lose a key, or you potentially just want to deactivate something for a moment. You can then also go actions and you can reactivate it. So if you find that stuff's breaking in your system, you can reactivate it. And then the last thing is you can go right click and you can delete the access key. So it doesn't delete the user, it just deletes the key that allows to access it. This is a one-way action. So once you've deleted it, you won't be able to get it back, and you will have to recreate the key and you have to reload it into n8n. But it is possible to do this. Just deactivate, and we can just copy the access key and we delete like that. And now that it's deleted, we can be sure that that key is never going to access this user again. That's basically it. The last thing I'll show you is just how to delete the user. So you can just go to users, you can just click here, you can delete the user, just confirm, and that will basically delete the user, so you can no longer have access to AWS. So that's it for the session. It's just been a quick demo on how to do it. The reason I'm doing this is because this is going to be fundamental to a lot of the sessions I'm going to do in the future. So I just wanted to make sure that it's absolutely clear for people how they can set up this connection between n8n and AWS. If you enjoyed this, give us a comment below. I'm happy to do more like this. Please give feedback or anything you want to see in the n8n AWS space. And until next time, cheers.